The pet store was unusually quiet that evening, the soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above me. I hadn't planned to stop by. I was just passing through, lost in my thoughts, when something made me pause. In the corner of the shop, past the playful puppies and chirping birds, sat a small glass enclosure. Inside, curled up in the farthest corner, was a rabbit. Unlike the others, who twitched their noses and hopped around excitedly, this one barely moved. Its fur was a soft mix of white and grey, slightly unkempt, as if no one had cared to groom it. But what caught me most were its eyes, dark, round, and filled with something I couldn't quite place. Was it sadness? Loneliness? I took a step closer, pressing my hand gently against the glass. The rabbit lifted its head slightly, as if acknowledging me, but it didn't move any further. The store worker noticed my interest and walked over. "That one's been here for a long time," he said with a small sigh. "People usually want the younger ones, the energetic ones. This little guy, he just waits." Something about those words sent a strange ache through my chest. He just waits. For what? For someone to choose him? For a home? For something he had lost? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing: I couldn't walk away. I stood there, staring at the rabbit, unable to look away. Something about it made my chest tighten, like an invisible thread pulling me closer. I had never owned a rabbit before. I didn't even know the first thing about caring for one. But as I watched it sit there, so still, so quiet, I felt a deep sadness settle inside me. How long had it been here, waiting for someone to notice? How many people had walked past without a second glance? I hesitated, my fingers brushing against the glass. The rabbit didn't flinch, didn't scamper away like the others. It just sat there, its tiny ears twitching slightly. Up close, I could see the dullness in its fur, the way its paws pressed lightly into the bedding, as if it was careful not to take up too much space. It looked tired, not just physically, but in a way that made my heart ache. It was the kind of exhaustion that came from waiting too long for something that might never come. A soft sigh left my lips as I turned to the store worker. "Can I hold him?" My voice sounded uncertain, as if I couldn't believe I was asking. The worker nodded, opening the enclosure carefully and scooping the rabbit up with practiced hands. He placed it gently into my arms, and for a moment I froze. The rabbit was lighter than I expected, its tiny body warm against my chest. It didn't struggle, didn't try to escape. Instead, it nestled closer, its nose pressing lightly against my sweater. I felt something shift inside me. I had only meant to look. Just a quick stop, a moment of curiosity. But now, standing here with this fragile little creature in my arms, I knew I couldn't leave without it. I had no idea what the future would hold. No idea if I was making the right decision. But as the rabbit let out a tiny, almost content sigh against me, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we both needed this. When I brought the rabbit home, I expected it to settle in quickly, but I was wrong. The moment I opened the carrier, it darted to the farthest corner of the room, pressing itself against the wall as if trying to disappear. My heart sank. I had imagined this moment differently. I thought it would hop around, curiously sniff the new space, maybe even let me pet it. But instead, it looked small and scared, its tiny body trembling slightly. I tried offering food, fresh lettuce, carrots, even a small piece of apple, but it wouldn't eat. It just sat there, its dark eyes watching me, full of hesitation. I sighed, setting the food down nearby and giving it space. Maybe it just needed time. But as the hours passed, doubt crept into my mind. Had I made a mistake? What if I wasn't the right person to care for it? What if it never trusted me? The first night was the hardest. I barely slept, worried about the rabbit, checking on it every few hours. It hadn't touched the food, and I could tell it hadn't moved much. I sat beside the enclosure, whispering softly, hoping my voice would be comforting. "You're safe now," I said, even though I wasn't sure it believed me, even though I wasn't sure I believed myself. The days that followed were challenging. I had to adjust my routine, waking up earlier to check on the rabbit, making sure it had everything it needed. I read articles, watched videos, trying to learn how to gain its trust. But progress was slow. It still flinched when I moved too quickly. It refused to eat from my hand. It never made a sound. My friends didn't understand why I was putting in so much effort. "It's just a rabbit," one of them said. "Maybe it's better off with someone else." Their words stung more than I expected. I wanted to defend my decision, but deep down I wasn't sure they were wrong. The bills were adding up: food, supplies, a vet visit to make sure it was healthy. And yet, every time I thought about giving up, something held me back. Then, one evening, something changed. I was sitting on the floor, exhausted, feeling the weight of my doubts. The rabbit was in the corner as usual, watching me with its careful eyes. I sighed and looked away, rubbing my hands over my face. But then, softly, almost too quietly to notice, I heard a sound. A tinny shuffle. When I looked up, the rabbit had moved. Just a little, just a few inches closer. I didn't move, afraid I would scare it away. I held my breath, waiting. And then, after another long moment, it stretched its nose forward, sniffing the air between us. My heart swelled. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small sign that maybe, just maybe, I was earning its trust. That night, for the first time since bringing it home, I felt hope. One evening, as I sat on the floor beside the rabbit's enclosure, I noticed something unusual. The small creature, who had been so hesitant before, was watching me closely. Its ears twitched, its nose wiggled, and for the first time, it didn't seem afraid. Slowly, I reached out my hand, offering a fresh piece of apple. For a moment, the rabbit hesitated. Then so gently it stretched forward and took the apple from my fingers. My heart pounded with excitement. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a huge step forward. As the days passed, the rabbit became more comfortable around me. It started eating while I was near, moving more freely, exploring its surroundings. I noticed how delicate it was, how its fur had a few patches that seemed thinner than the rest. I had never thought much about its past before, only that it had been abandoned. But now I couldn't stop wondering, where had it come from? Had it once belonged to someone? Had it been loved? One afternoon, as I was cleaning the enclosure, I noticed something hidden under its belly, a small mark, almost like a scar. Gently, I tried to look closer, but the rabbit tensed, pulling away. I didn't want to push it, so I let it go, but my mind kept turning. What had happened to this little animal before it came to me? That night, as I sat beside the enclosure, I decided to do something I hadn't done before. I spoke to the rabbit, not in whispers, not in short, soft words, but in full sentences, as if I were talking to an old friend. "I don't know what happened to you before," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "but I want you to know you're safe now. You don't have to be afraid anymore." The rabbit didn't move, but its ears twitched slightly, as if listening. A few days later, I took the rabbit to the vet for a routine checkup. As I sat in the waiting room, a woman next to me glanced at the rabbit in my carrier and smiled. "That's a beautiful rabbit," she said kindly. I thanked her, and we started talking. She told me she had worked in animal rescue for years, helping abandoned pets find new homes. As we talked, she glanced down at my rabbit again. Her smile faded slightly. "You know," she said gently, "I think I've seen a rabbit like this before." My breath caught. "Really?" I asked, my heart suddenly pounding. She nodded. A few months ago, a woman brought in a rabbit that looked almost exactly like this one. She was heartbroken, said she had lost it during a move and searched everywhere, but it was gone. I felt a strange pressure in my chest. Could it be possible? Could my rabbit have belonged to someone before? The vet called me in before I could ask more, but my mind was racing the whole time. After the check up, I couldn't stop thinking about what the woman had said. Had my rabbit been lost, not abandoned? Was there someone out there still looking for it? That night, I sat beside the rabbit, watching it closely. If it had belonged to someone before, why had it been so afraid of me? Had something happened to make it distrust humans? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Then an idea came to me. I pulled out my phone and searched for lost pet listings in my area. I scrolled through dozens of posts, dogs, cats, even birds, but then my breath caught. There it was. A picture of a rabbit. My rabbit. The post was months old, but the description was clear. A woman had lost her rabbit during a move. She had searched everywhere, put up flyers, even contacted shelters, but had never found it. The words at the end of the post made my throat tighten. I just hope someone kind found her. I stared at the screen, my emotions tangled in ways I didn't expect. This rabbit had a home, a real home, and I had been the one keeping it from going back. I looked over at the small creature, now curled up comfortably in its enclosure. I had been so focused on gaining its trust, on making it feel safe, that I hadn't considered what it might have lost. This whole time, I thought I was rescuing the rabbit, but maybe it had been searching for something all along, and maybe I had been searching for something too. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rabbit's real owner had been searching for her for months. I kept thinking about the last line of the post. I just hope someone kind found her. I had found her. I had given her a home. But now I had to ask myself the hardest question: was I strong enough to let her go? I got out of bed and walked over to the enclosure. The rabbit was resting, her small body curled up in the soft bedding I had carefully prepared for her. She looked peaceful, as if she finally felt safe. My heart ached. I had spent so much time earning her trust, and now I had to make a choice. If I contacted the woman from the post, I might have to say goodbye forever. The next morning, I sat with my phone in my hands for a long time. My fingers hovered over the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to type the message. What if the rabbit had changed? What if she didn't remember her old home? What if she didn't want to go back? Doubt and fear filled my mind. I decided to take things slow. First, I would see if she reacted to the woman's name. I whispered it softly, barely more than a breath. Lena. The rabbit's ears twitched. My chest tightened. I said the name again, a little louder this time. Lena. The rabbit lifted her head. For the first time since I had brought her home, she looked at me with something deeper in her eyes, something almost like recognition. My throat felt dry. It was real. She knew the name, she remembered. A deep sadness settled in my chest. I had spent weeks gaining her trust, but in just a second I realized the truth. I wasn't the first person she had loved. I took a deep breath and did what I knew I had to do. I sent the message. The reply came quickly. The woman, Sarah, couldn't believe what I was saying. She asked for pictures. I sent them. Her response came almost instantly. That's her. That's my Lena. I thought I'd lost her forever. Tears welled in my eyes. Sarah wanted to meet. She wanted to take Lena home. The next day, I set up a meeting in the park. My heart felt heavier with every step as I carried the rabbit in her small travel carrier. I had never felt such a mix of emotions before: happiness for Lena, sadness for myself, and a deep fear of what would happen when the moment came to say goodbye. As I sat on a bench waiting, Lena pressed herself against the side of the carrier. She seemed nervous, sensing something was different. Then I saw her. A woman, slightly out of breath, rushing toward us. Her eyes were full of hope and disbelief. "Lena?" she called softly. The rabbit's ears perked up. My stomach twisted as I watched her tiny body go still. Then suddenly, she moved. She pressed against the carrier door, stretching as far as she could. Sarah knelt down beside us, tears already in her eyes. "Oh, my sweet girl," she whispered. I unlatched the carrier door. For a moment, Lena hesitated. My heart pounded. Would she stay with me? Would she remember Sarah? And then, in one small but powerful moment, Lena made her choice. She hopped out of the carrier and into Sarah's arms. Sarah sobbed, holding her close, whispering words I couldn't hear. I felt something break inside me, but I smiled through the pain. This was the right thing. Lena had found her way home, and somehow I knew I would be okay too. As I watched Lena nuzzle into Sarah's arms, a strange mix of emotions flooded through me: pain, relief, and an unexpected sense of peace. It was never my plan to love this little rabbit, yet she had found a place in my heart so effortlessly. Now I was letting her go, knowing that she was exactly where she belonged. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes still glistening with tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, softly. "You gave her a home when she needed one. You kept her safe." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. She changed my life too. And it was true. I had been so lost when I found her. Lonely, disconnected, unsure of what I was missing. Lena had reminded me that love, no matter how small, has a way of finding us when we least expect it. We talked for a little while longer, and then, with one last grateful smile, Sarah walked away, carrying Lena back to the life she had lost. I watched them disappear down the path, feeling the ache in my chest grow stronger. That night, my apartment felt emptier than ever. I kept looking at the corner where Lena's enclosure used to be, half expecting to see her tiny ears twitching or hear the soft rustle of hay, but it was quiet, too quiet, and yet, deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. A few weeks later, I found myself at an animal shelter, walking past rows of small cages. My heart clenched as I saw so many animals, waiting, hoping for someone to notice them. I stopped in front of one enclosure. A pair of big, curious eyes stared back at me. A small, frightened rabbit pressed against the back of the cage. I crouched down and reached out my hand. For a moment, there was hesitation, and then a tiny movement, a slow, cautious step forward. I smiled. Love doesn't always come in the way we expect. Sometimes it finds us in the form of a lost rabbit on a cold night. Sometimes it's in the choice to let go, and sometimes it's in the quiet moment when we decide to open our hearts again. I wasn't just rescuing another rabbit. Maybe in some way I was rescuing myself too.